Hello everyone, thank you very much for coming and welcome to the annual meeting of the New Champions 2017 in Dalian, China, where the overall theme of the meeting is on inclusive growth in the fourth industrial revolution. This press conference is a chance for us all to meet some of our community of young scientists. I will do a brief introduction of them, but I think I will probably also ask you to explain a bit more what you can do. On my immediate left is Kellie Charles. You're a senior lecturer and research group leader of the Cancer Therapeutics Research Group of the University of Sydney. And then we also have Michael Bowen. Michael, you're a biomedical research fellow at the University of Sydney. Your work is very much, I think, on cutting-edge cellular and preclinical research techniques on the central nervous system. And Jenny Mortimer, Director of Plant Systems Biology at the Joint BioEnergy Institute of the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. I'm going to go to each of you one by one, and maybe actually you can. I think those titles probably don't do justice to the full work that you do. So maybe if you could describe a little bit about what you do.
So I'm a cancer researcher. I bridge both cellular work as well as patient work, and I do. I'm moving more into the direction of health services research and looking at the effectiveness of cancer medicines in our populations.
Yeah, so my group were very much focused on drug development, and in particular developing new drugs that target the brain's oxytocin system, which you might have heard of as this cuddle chemical or love hormone. But we're exploring drugs that target this system for the treatment of substance use disorders, so alcohol use disorder, cocaine use disorder.
The cuddle kettle love?
Yeah, the cuddle chemical, the love hormone.
Oh, okay.
So it's very heavily involved in social behaviour across all mammalian species, including us humans.
And Jenny?
So I'm a plant biochemist and I work on making renewable fuels and chemicals, so biofuels, anything you can make from oil, trying to use plants as the feedstock, so non-food plants, and municipal waste as well.
And I think a question to all of you really, I mean, is it a good time to be a scientist? Is it a good time to be a young scientist?
I think it's a great time to be a scientist. We all love what we do. We have been very passionate about staying in a career of science. We've spent many years at university, and I think the chances and the challenges that are facing society are really there for us to actually be working on, and I think it's a really exciting time.
Yeah, I think it's always a great time to be a scientist, and we need the best and brightest going out there and getting into scientific pursuits. There are, of course, challenges. You know, it's a little bit concerning as a scientist when really our primary aim is to pursue the truth, and the Oxford English Dictionary word of the year is post-truth. But you know, these are challenges that have come up before. Galileo was imprisoned for pursuing the truth and sticking to the evidence. To the best of my knowledge, the Trump administration hasn't started imprisoning scientists yet, so I think we're still in a pretty good position.
So you're not worried about being jailed any?
No. I do work in drug development, but it's all above board.
It's all above board. That's very good. Jenny.
For me, I think I also think it's a great time to be a scientist. And the thing that really struck me is we've moved to being a global economy. Science works best as something that's done across borders, collaborating across the world, and really making the most of all the minds that are out there. And it's become so much easier to travel between countries, to work in different countries. I think almost all of us have probably worked overseas at some point. And things like social media are making it really easy to connect up and talk to people directly.
So you're finding that it's quite possible to have to have conversations to promote your work. I mean, how do you find it's difficult to promote your work, or?
I think it's not difficult to promote your work, but it's difficult to know who you're really reaching. And one of the reasons I actually really like Twitter, and it's something that's taken me by surprise, I would say, is that you directly know who you're engaging with a lot of the time, and so you can really refine your message and make sure that you're really communicating what you want to say to them and answering questions they have in real time.
Yeah, I think this is something we've discussed at length this morning with our other colleagues in the young scientist community, that we've really got to make an effort, this new generation of scientists coming through, to engage more broadly with the public. We tend to, I think, sometimes stick within our comfort zone and communicate with the same sector of the public that are already sort of on board with science, but we've really got to make an effort of engaging in new ways so that we can appeal to as broad, I guess, of the population as possible.
You feel that scientists tend to talk to scientists, or?
Scientists, or I guess even science journalism is sometimes set up in such a way that you're already talking to people in the public who are enthusiastic about science. But, you know, science is for everyone. We do the work that we do, not just for people who are enthusiastic about science, and certainly not just for other scientists. We do it for all of humanity, for the world, and it's important that everyone gets those messages.
Kellie?
Yeah. I agree. I think we do a lot of science communication between ourselves, and we're very good at that. But our reach perhaps to other members of the public is definitely needing improvement. We realise that science can be a little bit scary if you don't have the science sort of literacy levels. And so we have to make it relatable to people of all walks of life so that they can see the importance of and the relevance of our findings to their lives and to the greater good of society.
I think we were talking a little bit earlier outside about sort of how you're trained in sort of evidence and facts and discipline, yet sort of often the way that people communicate or understand or end up liking something is entirely emotional. Is that?
Yes. So I think we all have narratives or stories that we can associate with any of our work. We all think there are periods of time when we have a great discovery or a great finding that you find is actually better provided to the community in a way that you say, well, I did this work, and at that time I felt it was really important because the drug I was using gave that person the opportunity to, their tumour was shrinking, for example, and they had that opportunity to tell their loved one for the first time in 6 months that they loved them. Now that will resonate with someone much greater. This is something that I have done in my PhD.
Could you just elaborate a bit on that?
So I was working on a new drug called docetaxel at the time, which is a cancer drug that's now used quite frequently in breast cancer and lung cancer.
But it was new.
And it was new. It was about 10 years ago, and we were doing clinical trials, and this was in a man who had a very large head and neck cancer, and when you're doing this kind of research to see whether something's effective or not, you really are waiting to see whether something works. And it's those moments that perhaps you don't get the absolute benefit where you see tumours are always shrinking and therefore it will go forward. But those little, tiny little stories of someone saying, well, actually, even if this tumour doesn't go away and my life is short, I had that one opportunity to have that moment of closeness that I was not able to speak before. My tumour shrunk enough that I was able to eat and drink, but I also got to say I love you to my loved one.
Wow.
And so that makes you think, well, that keeps you wanting to pursue the truth more.
Michael?
Yeah, I think perhaps what we have to learn is that there's a difference between being impartial and, I guess, just completely devoid of too much passion when we're in the laboratory and being like that when we're communicating the science. You know, once we're out of the laboratory, we've got the evidence. I don't think there's anything wrong with expressing passion about what we do. We do what we do day in, day out, and a lot of us work very long hours doing it because we are very passionate about what we do, and I think it's important to communicate that to the public.
Yeah, and I was also thinking from what you were saying, that the process of doing science, communicating that while we might write up journal articles, they're very dry. It probably didn't include that anecdote, for example. But actually, when you're in the lab, we're talking all the time.
That's not in a paper.
That is not in a paper.
It's not in the paper. But there's a lot of laughter and a lot of emotions involved in doing science, and that while the final product can seem very dry, the process is full of highs and lows. And there's been tears and laughter and shouting and screaming. If people get a great result in the lab, they'll be whooping and running around. And so trying to communicate that it's a really fun process and that we're really engaged with every aspect of it, and trying to communicate that out when you're talking about it is, for me, really important.
I think we don't. The other thing I think we don't mention to other people very often is that I ask a lot of my friends who are, professionals in industry and working in healthcare and whatever else, I actually wake up in the morning and love going to work.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people actually don't do that. I find that creative process of being involved in science is something that we don't give ourselves a lot of credit for. And that job satisfaction of being able to say at the end of the day, yes, I've helped someone, I've solved this issue that was a problem, is a really big high for most of us.
Did you go into science to solve problems? Was it, what originally motivated you?
I think I wanted initially to become a doctor. That was my initial plan when I headed off to university. But ultimately, I was asking far too many questions that I think would have frustrated many of my clinical colleagues now. And so the scientific process of being always inquiring and never quite stopping at why suits me better. And so eventually that was the pursuit, that I wanted to just keep asking questions.
Yeah, the pursuit of truth is why I went into science, and it's one of the few professions where you can really, for your entire career, be working on something new all the time. You're constantly, you solve one problem, it just opens up a whole range of other questions, and that's a wonderful thing. There's never a dull day.
Yeah, I think the reason I went into it is because I was really curious about how things work. And so you can apply a lot of things we know about engineering to biology. Biology is a moving process, and plants, for me, are particularly incredible because the seeds land wherever they land, and then you have to produce a whole plant that survives under heat and drought, and it feeds the world, it provides materials for building the buildings around us, it fuels us. And all of that, there's so much to learn about that, so little we know, and we kind of take it for granted. Yeah.
Do you think people don't, I mean, you touched on obviously the very obvious benefit of your research area, which is that you're studying something that feeds the world. Do you think that maybe people don't often appreciate that actually science's value to society? I mean, how would you explain to somebody that it does have value?
Probably a very easy example is the Green Revolution in agriculture. So that happened in the 50s and 60s, which was to improve the breeds of food crops that we eat and add additions of herbicides, pesticides, and fertilizers to plants. And that's allowed us to feed about 1 billion more people just through those improvements over the last 40 or 50 years. So that's an incredible, and that's allowed us to keep up with population increases. But now we're facing the same problems again, that the population is increasing, and we're going to need to produce somewhere between 50 and 70% as much food over again. And that's going to require science and research to go with it.
I think that's something really important you've touched upon here, is that I've yet to meet a scientist who's gone into science just because of some obscure personal interest. Every scientist I've ever met has a goal at mind, which is to pursue the betterment of humanity and the world. And I think that's something that doesn't get across always, but it's important that that message does get heard.
In your research area, what are the sort of clear benefits? And I mean, maybe even not your specific, but your the wider discipline, I guess. Sure.
Well, I'll take my specific research. So I've focused my career on what I like to call the forgotten disorders. So these are the disorders that are a huge burden to health around the world, like addiction, for instance. World Health Organization attributes 15% of all deaths worldwide each year to the harmful use of addictive substances. That's a lot of people dying from something that's preventable. Yet we don't have effective treatments for these disorders largely. So you'd think that the big pharmaceutical companies would be working, feverishly to try and find new pharmaceutical interventions for these disorders, but they're really not. There's only 36 companies roughly around the world that are working on new pharmaceutical interventions for substance use disorders. So I see my passion and my skill set as being able to contribute in an area of great need where there really isn't a lot of work going on.
Kellie?
I guess I'm working in cancer, it's easy to see, and to relate to people. I think it's more important in areas that perhaps people don't realise are part of their daily lives. I mean, we use our phones every day, we use the internet, in here we're using Wi-Fi. All of those things were pursuits of scientists. We've completely forgotten that those processes required a scientific discovery and a development and a translation. Apple did not discover the phone. And so I think the general member of the public might actually think that. My son is 7. He cannot comprehend a world without Google. He doesn't understand that there was a time not that long ago that we didn't have the internet. And so I think without actually telling or being able to talk to people and say, all of these things that you use every day are really driven by a scientific process, people don't really appreciate it. And I worry that things that are intangible, like potentially diseases that we saw in the past, like polio, whooping cough, measles, that people don't see every day, don't see the relevance of why we should have vaccinations. Climate change, I guess, is another example. It seems very intangible because we don't see the effects on us today. However, in 50 years, we'll know what the effects are. And so people, unless there is a tangibleness to us, that I think it's difficult.
Yeah, because you have to, research, it actually takes a very long time is the problem, because all of us are it's tiny pieces of the jigsaw being put together, and when you need that information to be there when you need it, and that's going to have to be already done in advance, because you can't wait for food to run out and then say, oh, now it's time to do some research on improving productivity, or the oil's run out now, so now we should make renewable chemicals from plants. That research is going to take 20, 30 years, so you really have to start now, because you're sort of future-proofing yourself against these events.
So it's a kind of an insurance.
Yeah.
And obviously with insurance, you're kind of measuring risk. I just wanted to see if there are any questions from the floor. If not, then I have you can raise your hands. If not, I mean, do you feel? I want to sort of get back, I guess, to the risks that maybe science faces at the moment. Do you feel it's? I mean, science as a discipline. Do you feel it's under threat?
I feel that it's been deprioritized compared to what it was in previous generations. I can appreciate that perhaps people who were involved in NASA in the 60s, if you said you're a scientist, people would understand and be proud of your work. That's not to say I don't think if people know that you're a scientist that they're not proud of it, but I don't think they appreciate it in the same way. And I think it is really about that relevance to society and being able to go out and promote the good that we actually do. We don't do that enough. I think as naturally scientists, we're quite, not introverted, but we're not self-promoting in the way that other places are. And we all have stories, we all have successes that would amaze the community, but we actually don't go out of our way to do that, just because I think that's our nature of being quite objective. And we have to really challenge ourselves and mobilize ourselves to be able to do those things.
Do you promote what you and your colleagues do?
Yeah, you've got to go out and promote what you're doing. Coming back to what you were initially discussing, I think science does face some challenges in the current geopolitical climate. Kellie, Jenny and I have been working with a number of our colleagues in the young scientist community over the past 12 months drafting the Forum's Universal Code of Research Ethics, or Ethics for Researchers, which I encourage everyone to go and have a look at. I believe it's up on the website now. And it's been an interesting past 12 months with Brexit and the Trump administration getting in and all of the developments, looking at these values. So just a couple of the values that, or principles that we propose in that code of ethics are to pursue the truth, to engage with the public.
This is a code of ethics for all researchers. Okay.
So these are principles, values that we all agreed upon. So we're a very diverse group. I think we have representatives from just about every continent except Antarctica and all of the major fields of science. So it's a very representative group of the scientific community, and these are the core principles that we came up with that we all agree upon. And we've got pursue the truth, engage with decision makers, to support diversity, and to engage with the public. Some of these are under direct threat. You know, you've got politicians now coming out and calling evidence being presented fake news if it's inconvenient. That's a direct challenge to science. You've got policies being put in place in the United States and Australia which directly threaten the movement of scientists across countries, and that's not a good thing. You know, that directly threatens the diversity that has given so much prosperity to science over many, many generations.
Jenny?
Yeah, actually I think your point that one of the ethics we worked on, Michael and I, was engaging with decision makers. So that means that not just engaging with the general public, but actually going out there and talking to people who make these decisions and finding out really what's concerning them. Why is it that they are shying away from the truth, and how can we work to reassure them that we're not working with an agenda? We're just trying to present some facts to enable them to make the correct policy decisions. So we're not trying to guide policy in that sense, we're just providing information. And maybe there's things we can do to, maybe there's different information they need, or it needs to be presented in a certain way that's different from how we're actually portraying it at the moment. So trying to open up those dialogues with people who make these decisions and giving them access to the scientists, I think is a really important thing I think I'd like to see more of in the future.
I think we have a question.
Yeah.
Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Farai Gundan. I'm a young global leader and a Mason Fellow at Harvard University. I'm actually very impressed by the fact that there are more women on this science panelist, so kudos to you girls. But I'm interested in getting some of your thoughts on and views on, so when you think about the science and technology pipeline, I'm interested in finding out some success factors as well as challenges in recruiting and retaining women in the sciences field, because I don't think we often talk about that, but I'm curious to hear from you what we can do from a very young age, and then through the pipeline, how do we retain women in this field? Thank you so much.
I guess I come from a university. The University of Sydney is one of the pilot universities in Australia that are going under the SAGE, which is Science and Gender Equality pilot program, which is modelled off the Athena Swan program in the UK. We have a 40% target of women in senior management, both at the professional level, so supportive administration, as well as academia. So I guess I'm a beneficiary of that process. I was promoted last year to associate professor. We have, I guess, a scissoring of women. We have a lot of women coming into undergraduate science, and not necessarily engineering, but maths. We've got a good representation of women. We have initial recruitment that's very good, so our junior level academia is very good. However, it's after that point where you're sort of in your mid-30s thinking about career and family that we do see a lot of difference and a decrease in women participation. But there are lots of things that are going on in terms of maternity leave packages, reinsertion back into the academic pathway, that we're all going for, and this kind of promotion of getting through some of those barriers of why do women think that they're not able to be promoted to senior levels. So going through, mentoring, sponsorship programs that are very much targeted towards women academics. And we do a lot of outreach to schools, particularly to young girls, to say, we're not all crazy old men with white hair in lab coats. This is a scientist. And to go through and say, and to challenge those gender biases from a very young age, but also to maintain it through high school, because I think it also gets to that point where young girls are facing those challenges of what to choose in their career, and to say that science is a really exciting option for them.
Yeah, I agree with Kellie that I think a lot of institutions have gotten better at getting more women involved in science at the, I guess, the more entry level, but it is getting representation at the more senior levels that's the challenge. And I actually think what's required is greater flexibility in science. Science is an extremely rigid profession in terms of the expectations of how your career develops, the hours that you have to work, the travel abroad, working in numerous different countries. And you think, okay, if you're finishing your PhD up in your late 20s or early 30s, and you're doing postdocs and you're having to move from Europe to the United States to South America to Australia doing various different postdocs, that's quite disruptive if you want to have a family. And I think a greater level of flexibility in the way that scientific careers develop will be beneficial.
So almost the global nature of science, that it's necessary that you have to sort of travel places. It actually can make that difference.
I mean, I didn't do international travel for 5 years after my son. It just wasn't on my radar to do so, and that does impact your track record. And it's not really always taken into consideration. It sometimes is, and you can write it in, but I think a lot of men don't appreciate that your role changes as your life changes, and that it's okay for that to happen. And I think also women who sit on these grant review panels also have probably gone through in a very different era where you had to come back very quickly, and don't appreciate why women of today actually say, well, no, I want to have both. I want my family, and I want to be a career scientist as well, and then I want that decision to be respected. That is a different conversation to have, particularly with much more senior women who have come through in different generations. But it's one that we're having, and I think at least we're talking about it.
Jenny?
So for me, I think picking up on what Kellie said, for me, mentoring is one of the key things you can do, because it really affects everything from like preschool kids, like if they meet a scientist for the first time, and keeping connections going right through. And I think every successful scientist, and particularly female scientists, can point to a string of mentors throughout their careers. for me, particularly, I've got some fantastic male mentors who've supported me, who at every step encouraged you and helped you out along the way. The problem is that's really ad hoc. So I was very lucky.
Same.
And I know people who are smarter than me, better scientists than me, who just didn't have access to the same level of mentoring. And because of that, their career has not been as successful as mine. And so trying to formalize that a bit more, making sure that mentoring is available to everybody, and that mentoring is recognized, that this takes up a lot of time on behalf of some of these senior scientists, and therefore it should be something that's recognized and celebrated as being really key to helping out some of these problems. Because if senior people are mentoring, they're also hearing about the issues, because the issues might change. Like the issues for a woman scientist in their 50s and 60s now are different to younger women. So hearing that feedback can be very important to then change policy that's around them.
Any sort of, we're sort of close to running out of time. I think we have about a minute left. Any sort of other comments or things that you sort of feel, I guess, that you want to tell the audience, really?
I think, I mean, we started with a conversation, I think, we talked about it briefly yesterday amongst our community about how do we engage the public better with science. And really this morning we kind of galvanized together. So it was a bit unexpected. I didn't think it would change our behavior today as much as it has. And I think just
so people responded?
We responded, yes, we want to talk about this. But actually this morning, most of us gave up many sessions to actually sit down and discuss and talk about what are the issues, what do we think the concerns are, how do we think we might change this. And this was just a small group. There's 40 of us here. We sat down and we discussed it. And we realized actually if we can mobilize this small group now, if we were able to put it out there, perhaps that becomes much bigger. And that there are a lot of people with the same concerns, particularly young scientists, that this will change the way, hopefully, that we can engage with the public.
Do keep us informed on what you do with that. Sorry.
Exactly.
Yeah, look, I think I'd love to see the image of science change. This is something that's been coming up throughout the meeting. Imran Khan's spoken about it, needing to humanise science, and I think that's a really worthy pursuit. We were discussing just before the start of this panel session how each one of us has been asked or told on numerous occasions that we don't look like scientists, and I always respond to that, well, what does a scientist look like? And I think that's something unique in science, that there is this very stereotypical perception of what a scientist looks like.
You're not wearing your lab coat.
No, that's right. I haven't got a hunchback and Coke bottle goggles on, although I would if I didn't have my contact lenses in. That's beside the point. So I think coming down to this human level and connecting with people on a more personal level and saying, hey, we're just people as well. We have the same passions, the same desires, the same flaws as other human beings, and we're all just out there trying to do our bit in the world and make it a better place.
For me, I think this opportunity of the young scientists at the WEF is a really great example of taking people out of their comfort zone and exposing them to a whole new audience. And I've been speaking to people today who work in tech, who work in all sorts of industries, who haven't spoken to a scientist in 10, 15, 20 years, even though they work in relatively technical industries. And things have changed a lot. So opening up those channels of communication, because otherwise I can't see many opportunities where we'd actually get to chat and interact. So not just the general public, but to target different sectors and try and communicate what we're doing and learn from them.
We could talk about that as well, but I think we've run out of time. But thank you very, very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Pleasure.